Hey everyone, thank you for coming and joining us. This webinar is our second in the series of supply chain, and we'll be speaking specifically about demand planning. Demand planning is a big term and encompasses many different tools, many different avenues of gathering demand, but we will stick with the supply chain procurement angle on demand planning. We will speak to a tool of demand planning. And we will speak to, from a procurement perspective, what do we like to see, and some pitfalls on if the demand planning process is not completed correctly. What could we possibly face in that instance? So let's get started. Let's define demand planning. What is demand planning? It is an informal definition. So there is a formal one, but for our conversation, let's keep it informal. It's the future needs of the company, and it's determined by sales and production. Obviously, if you aren't selling or producing, there is no need for a demand. So we are assuming that there is a need for a product, and therefore it needs a set of raw materials to make the product or to be able to provide a service. So it applies to both materials and services, and it is for future needs. So if you need it today, we're already too late. That falls into a different sort of a category. But when we talk about demand planning, we're talking about in the future, primarily. When we speak about types of demand, we have loosely broken down into three for planned. So we have planned and unplanned demand. For planned demand, we speak about project. And this could be I'm building a building, or I'm constructing a room within a building, and I forecast that it's going to happen in Q3 of 2023. What other what materials do I need? What labor do I need? What trades do I need? What permits do I need? So that is project. So that's in the future a little bit. That gives you a little bit more time for definition. The other is continuous operational requirements. Now, it's a long term to say that when we are in the service of, when we're doing a continuous service, providing continuous service or continuous material production, there is an ongoing need for raw materials. So in a material case, we need the raw material in question. We may need packaging supplies. We may need labor. We may need pallets. We need storage space. There's a whole host of requirements. From a service perspective, we talk about the availability of resources as the number one type of requirement in a continuous operation. I need to make sure that my resources are available, and therefore, if I have planned my need ahead of time, I have a reasonable guarantee that they will be available. Planned one-off. Now, one-off is simply, it could be annual, it could be semi-annual. In this instance, as an example, I would think about maintenance. It happens, pre-planned maintenance may happen once or twice a year. And during that maintenance period, you may need a set of materials and a certain set of skilled labor. That you don't need in the rest of the year, but you need it for that specific time. And that is the one-off, but it is also planned because when the maintenance period is happening, when when that break in production is going to happen, so you are able to plan for it. The next step here is the unplanned demand. Now, we still add this into the demand, even though it is unplanned, it is ad hoc emergency, simply because the repetitive nature of emergencies, that's a cause for concern. And oftentimes it is a cause for poor planning. It's a consequence of poor planning. And if there are consistent emergencies within a section of the business, it is essential. Step one, satisfy the need of the business. Get the material or service that you need to keep operations functioning. And the second set is implement corrective actions immediately, which could be workshops, meetings, demand planning sessions, agreements with suppliers, stocking in-house, stocking in vendor warehouses, whatever you need to do to make sure that this emergency doesn't repeat itself. So you're then able to take the strategic sourcing approach, which is my immediate need is satisfied. Now let's talk about the future demand. How do we consume it? How do we need to package? How do we store it? And more importantly, how much do we need in the coming months and years? The emergency demand corrective actions are very time consuming. and they often lead to escalations within an organization that would be unnecessary on a normal day-to-day business, which causes stress, anxiety, and it usually is a perception of poor performance, that as an organization we don't have it together, we don't know what we need, so we're constantly putting pressure on the vendors, our logistics partners, get me this material. And internally in the company, it's like, procurement, you aren't supposed to know, and we're like, operations, can you please tell me what you need? So it causes stress and anxiety and affects relationships as well. So if an emergency happens repetitively, it's not really an emergency, it's poor planning. So that's the takeaway that I want to be able to share with you on this slide. Let's go to the next one. When demand isn't available. So we spoke about, there is aspects of demand, but sometimes we get into a situation where we say, yeah, I have a need, but I don't know. I have no information. Usually there is information in different silos or pockets of the organization. So that's where you want to be able to have cross-functional relationships. So you're breaking down the silos. But if in a case where as a procurement professional, I'm sitting here saying, oh, I need to buy this, but I don't know how much, I don't know who to go to, there's a few avenues for us to navigate. So first is planning and sales. That's the ideal state. Planning and sales simply tells you from a future perspective, this is what I need. And these are the peaks and valleys of my consumption as well. And these are maybe the different parameters on packaging that I would need. So they would be able to give you the best information because you're looking into the future, you're looking into a non-emergency time period. You have the ability to plan, set out your vendor list, set out the request. Your vendors have the ability to come back and provide you proper quotations and specs, and to do the proper due diligence. If you don't have that available, then you go to the next step, which is historical demand. It is less reliable, but in a steady state operation, you're relying on past performance and assuming that it remains the same going forward. The issue with that is the historical does not reflect new realities and may cause contractual challenges. You may be able to say, well, I bought X number last year and I need to buy Y number this year. Oh, sorry, I need to replicate X, but you consume Y. Now, in that scenario, if you're significantly under what you have put into a contract with the vendor, there is a consequence, either material or non-material, definitely with a relationship. On a relationship standpoint, it may not be financial, but from a relationship standpoint, there will be some detriment. And if you go significantly over, certain industries have gone through allocation periods in the last couple of years due to just absolute peaks in demand. So if you're on a contract and you've given the best indication of your demand, that organization puts aside that volume for you. If you blow past that volume, there is a good chance that they may not be able to give you the material or provide you the service because they have other customers they would have promised those resources to. So historical, it's less reliable, but it is a way for you to take a step forward, saying, this is what we consumed last year. Mr. Planning, Mr. Sales, can you come in and validate this information? The vendor is an avenue, but it usually raises red flags with the vendor in question. And it does cause a ripple effect in the relationship. You've never asked for this information before. You are relying on the vendor to give you all the material and the services, and all of a sudden you come in and say, hey, how much do I buy, and when do I buy it, and give me some estimation. All of a sudden that will start causing stress and anxiety, saying, is our service not good enough? Give us an idea, give us some feedback. And this usually ends up being a signal that it's a departure from the norm, and there's, so we're doing something different, and maybe this relationship is coming to an end. So it causes a little bit of ruffles the feathers, and you have to be tactful when you want to go to a vendor and ask them for this information. Ideal state, even with the other two, you do not want to go into the vendor. You want to validate that information for sure. But if you want information from the vendor on your purchase history, make it a steady state, make it regular. So I want quarterly, every quarter. So then it's not out of the norm for them to send you that information. But if you've never asked for this information and you go and ask this information, there is a cause for concern. with them. And generally, since the surrounding market is a smaller market, everybody speaks. It starts you start getting a buzz in the general vendor community. Let's speak to let's change a little bit and go to a demand planning tool. We'll speak to the scope of work. It is a tool, is one of the aspects. It's one of the complete documents that you can actually put together for demand planning purposes. This is material and services, and this is quite common in a lot of industries. So this is regular layman terms in terminology, scope of work. It is a powerful document, and it is a key to a successful contract. What does that mean? It means a scope of work, if done correctly, it includes all the tasks, activities, quality requirements, the purpose, the milestones, the limitations. It puts all of that into a written document, and that is shared with the vendor community. So when somebody is bidding on this business, they have all the information that is required for them to make an informed decision on pricing, on participation, and on general contract terms. In a good scope of work, the end state of affairs is well stated. So I want this delivery of material at this quality and agreed upon price. There is no ambiguity on what I'm getting out of as a when you participate in executing the scope of work. There's no ambiguity on what I'm getting. It is in addition, a scope of work can also contain training needs, so say your agreement is for a year. In that scope of work, if you clearly define I want post support after the end of the year, that is also something that you can then put into a contract and then have it mandated as well. A good scope of work it cannot be understated. It is one of the largest keys to a successful contract. From a procurement perspective, what is a good scope of work? I mean, why is it that important? Is because you want to be able to allow for a fair and auditable procurement process. What does that mean? It means internally, when the operations or your support functions come and present to you a list of a scope of work, off the bat, understand that what kind of workload is going to be placed on your team, and do you have the resources to support this scope of work and in the time frame that is required. This is essential, and usually in larger and well-organized organizations, you would have to sit down with your stakeholders at the beginning of the year and go through your list of expected workload, and then be able to decide how you can support the business with the resources you have. The other thing, a good scope of work, it shows that operations or business is aligned on this is something that we feel is important enough for us to go and spend our time, resources, and effort on, and its outcome is important to meet our business objectives. So that is also a key point. The last thing is expectations are aligned. When we have expectations in a scope of work, there's no ambiguity. Again, I don't know what a good, I don't have to guess what a good outcome to a RFP or RFQ process is. It's written down in black and white. Externally, you are able to, if a good scope of work, you're able to provide equal opportunity to the vendor base. There is nothing that irks vendors more than having specific language or points in there that disqualify half the community. That is important to maintain credibility within the vendor base and for them to take your RFQs and RFPs seriously. Otherwise, you'll have the same 4 or 5 people coding on it all the time, and it's going to be like this musical chairs between those individuals or organizations. In terms of having complete timeliness, you can start and end the RFP process within a given time frame if all the information is there. You're not coaching the community on how to bid on the business. You're not responding to questions that are that they don't understand what you actually want. So it is important to have good stated outcomes as well. In the SOW, requirements are well defined. So that was the third point, and that is essentially, this is what I need from you, and this is how I need it, and this is what I would consider a completed service or a product. Now let's flip it on the other side. Let's go back to and say, what is a poor scope of work? What are the pitfalls? A consequence of poor scope of work can be quite severe. So a poor contract, for example, you go out and get a contract set up. However, the realities on the ground when you're doing the job do not reflect the pricing in the contract, and there are going to be constant amendments, or in certain cases, you will have to renegotiate that contract. In that scenario, in that renegotiation, usually it's not, people aren't optimistic. They're looking to protect their own interests, and therefore there is a little bit of stress when you're trying to renegotiate in the middle of a job actually happening. You may actually end up getting with incorrect material or service because you haven't clearly defined what you want as an outcome. Improper bids means you aren't able to evaluate apples to apples or apples and oranges. You will get a response that is completely different to what you expected. And that goes back to stating the purpose of this RFP. It's in the scope of work. What is the purpose? What is the outcome? And then you have to list your list of requirements as clearly as you possibly can. And then delays. This is what I was alluding to in terms of coaching your the bidders on how to actually bid for this job. If it's not very clear, you'll start getting a lot of questions. Do I need to submit my rate hourly? Can I do it on a day, on a per day basis, or do you need it as a lump sum? You have to be able to answer those questions. And then higher costs. When you have incomplete scope of work documents, organizations usually bid. They put a little bit more risk into the price, and that is simply because of variability. They know once I sign a contract, I may have some leeway with the cost, but if something goes totally wrong, there is a good likelihood that the vendor might end up getting stuck with a bill. Therefore, I put more risk, and therefore higher cost for you as a customer. This all translates to lost opportunity. Once you spend time going through an RFP process, it is quite a stressful process for you as a procurement individual, as a company, to go through, make sure that your needs are being met. And the more time you lose, the more opportunity you're losing. And if you keep repetitively having these same issues, there is a possible for reputational damage in the market where, again, the vendors, all communities speak to each other. They might just get together and be like, I don't understand how to code for this company. For me personally, I put in X percentage as a buffer just because I want to make sure that I don't get stuck with an aspect of the job that has not been clearly defined. And this happens more often than you can think. And this has been communicated in work, when you have town halls and you call vendors in. Oftentimes you will hear language such as this, that we don't understand the requirements. You're inflexible with us suggesting improvements, and therefore what we bid for you is usually higher than what we do with the market. So that's one of the pitfalls here. The other thing that I haven't mentioned here that I think I should be speaking to is issuing an RFP without a scope of work or without any demand in there. It's sometimes you get rushed. I need to meet this need. I need to meet this need. But this is don't do it. I mean, like, I'm trying to find the right words to say it, but just don't do it. You will lead to more issues through the life of the RFP with quite a poor outcome than you would if you had spent the time in the beginning aligning the need that in the first place. And it causes a lot of frustrations through the life, right? You're trying to define quality and quantity and price as you go through, and all of them keep varying. The timelines for the RFP keep varying. The other thing is, if you're unsure of what you actually need, the RFP is a bad approach. There are other avenues out there in terms of gathering information, having different vendors come in and have them draw up a proposal, not a proposal, but a scope for you in terms of, I think this is what you need, subject matter experts, right? You would call them in, have them define the problem for you so you can then go to the market. There are different avenues out there, but if you're going for an to the market with a request for proposal with a scope of work, ensure you spend the time to make sure the scope of work is correct, and it fulfills the actual need of the business. And that is how we're wrapping up today. So to summarize, demand planning is essential for to stabilize operations and to contain costs. Poor demand planning will lead to a lot of emergencies, a lot of your workload being spent in areas that that may not generate a lot of value for you and your organization. So as a method of strategic sourcing, this is one of the first steps we get into, is ensuring that we have a good picture of organizational need and the ability to communicate that to the market. Okay. So I'm now going to move to any questions. Yes, Angelo.
Hey, Shafi. Great, like the presentation. Quick question, and maybe I missed it, and forgive me if I have. With respect to, if I'm placing an order or for a certain product, the specifications, the quality requirements, the understanding of in the event that quality is compromised, and mechanisms to handle all that. Is that part of the work itself, the SOW, or is that become like a standalone supplier information that you would send along with that?
That's a very good question. That quality requirement would be embedded into the scope of work, saying I need X quality at the certain grade, and this is an expectation that you would provide me. Now you can also add in that before you ship me this material, you need to send me the quality documents for me to verify. If I do not verify and you ship it, I will not pay for this product. You could have that embedded. Now, if you have all of that in the scope of work, and you sign a contract and they still send you something incorrect, then you would take up the dispute mechanism in a contract to have that resolved. But you need to have that, the quality needs to be tied in very, very specifically in a scope of work, for sure. So.
Okay, so follow-up question. In the event that you receive the quote from your supplier, the supplier says, yeah, they'll do everything, they'll give you the releases, all of a sudden they start falling behind schedule, and that starts to jeopardize your situation. A lot of times that can get really, really sticky, in a sense that if you have a sole source where you're at their mercy, where they say, well, if you don't like it, don't take it, and then you're in trouble. And I just saw that recently with a client that Carmen is familiar with, and as well as I think Henry as well, where they have no choice but to keep taking defective product from their packaging customer. How would you protect yourself other than probably finding a dual source?
So you raised a very good point, Angelo. A sole source negotiation is very different than a competitive negotiation. In fact, the strategy in a sole source is very different. However, the scope of work creation is the same. You need to have a scope of work clearly define your needs. But to your point, if they keep sending you defective and it's a take it or leave it, there's a couple of aspects, a couple of things that you may be able to do. And I don't know if this would work. Now I'm going to give you an example of the railroads, right? CN and CP, they're the only ones we have as an option to ship. Oftentimes, you have the ability to relook at your specs and define, is it really this tight, or can I loosen this a little bit? Number one. Number two, you can't actually cancel the contract with them because they are sole source, but you can certainly raise enough noise for their leadership to pay attention to you. And oftentimes when that happens, there is some form of a compromise that you can make. The ideal state is to find an alternative. And when you say sole source, is different than a single source, right? A sole source is like they're the only ones that can do it. And in my experience, there's very few products in this world that only one person can do. Oftentimes, it is the time and effort making sure that there are other vendors out there, and that takes time. That takes a few years if you're in an operational environment to qualify the technical side, qualify then the commercial side. It takes a little bit of time. But in a sole source negotiation, a true sole source negotiation, what some of the stuff that I've put in contractual language, like outside of the scope of work, is saying if you're production is ceasing to exist at this facility, you will give me a 6 months you will give me a year's notice ahead of time, and I have the ability to buy 6 months of product ahead of time. So I will supersede your production queue above other customers to be able to buy. And depending on the customer, the client, I've had some success, some good success, and some reasonable success. I haven't actually had a failure in terms of success, other than maybe one in my entire career, and that kind of was the catalyst of expanding our supplier development to the entire world, and we were able to find an alternative by loosening our specs a little bit and then relaxing and accepting that we may have to pay a higher cost. When we did those two things, we were able to find an alternative.
So a good strategy to lead with all of this is to ensure you do supplier development on a continuous basis.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. Hey, Carmen.
Hey, Shafi, just a quick question. I know we're usually on the other side of this fence, but do you have any suggestions on how to provide, this type of constructive feedback to companies where we see that they're creating poor scope of work?
Yeah, of course. I've had direct meetings set up with the vendors that have provided bid to it. They have reached out repetitively, almost, for me to be able to make the time to sit down with them, and then they give me the feedback, and it's usually related to, I didn't understand this, it wasn't very clear, this is not
Right.
industry standard. But to be honest, if I send an email the first time, it's rare they respond back and say, okay, let's sit down and talk. I have to go and sort of make an effort to make sure that if I want to be invited back, first of all, if I want to be invited back, I need to make sure that they get my side of the story.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, I don't see any other question. I think this was the only question we had. We have a poll up in terms of did you enjoy this webinar? If you can please go ahead and answer that, that would be great and really appreciate it. I'm going to be here I'll open it up for the next 1 minute or so. But thank you for attending. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. The demand planning module is part of our strategic sourcing offering. You can find it on Find Courses. If you need help, again, reach out. We'll be able to guide you to it. And thank you for attending.
Thanks, Shafi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Just one last question, Shafi.
Sure.
Just to build on what Carmen had said, how would you prime a client that you're gone in there, say, looking at, I don't know, value streams or something of that nature? They're looking at waste reductions and so forth. How would you prime them to get them looking down that potential opportunity there?
Oh, you're meaning that it would be a different opportunity in comparison to what you were participating in?
Yeah, I mean, you're going for something else, and
Yes.
you realize that they're having problems with their suppliers, and just to build on what Carmen was saying.
Yeah, for sure. So if you do recognize something, I mean, I would be a little bit more strategic about it, and you would start the conversation addressing their immediate need. And that is, I think, one of the key ways we would do it is, I know you called me in here for this, and I see that great potential here. However, I see a larger opportunity maybe towards this, which would solve the fundamental problem causing you. So you have to bring it back to the original, what they asked for. Because if you stick in the secondary section, there's a low likelihood that they would be able to connect the dots. You'd have to connect the dots for them, and then have it loop back to the original problem they went to the market with.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. Well, okay. Thank you, guys, and have a good rest of the day. Hey, John.